I had a fan meetup recently, and much to my surprise, I had lots of ex-Catholics show up. Catholicism has been on my radar for a while now, but I haven't really paid much attention to it. I did a video about it a while back, but I took it down because I felt like my views on Catholicism have changed since I released it. But after talking to some ex-Catholic fans and reading up on the religion more, I decided it's time to address Catholicism. Is it a cult? Let's get into it.
So, Telltale Atheist is a member of the atheist community who I've been watching for probably a couple years now. Ever since I found his Jehovah's Witness videos, I've always found it particularly interesting, the inner workings of a lot of these sort of Christian cults and how they operate and propagandize and things like that. I find it fascinating, honestly. But I think lately he has been going a bit too far and overstepping the bounds of what you would refer to as a cult, especially with this video regarding the Catholic Church, where I think there's a lot of misrepresentations regarding certain aspects of it, which I will get into. And I think that the primary reason, as he mentions in this video, he spoke with a lot of ex-Catholics. And I think that's where he gets a lot of this misrepresentation from, and a lot of particularly negative biases towards the Catholic Church. So that's what I'm here to talk about today, especially with regards to penance and the rosary and things like that. However, if you think I misrepresented any of his points, I will link to the original video, and please let me know if you find that there's any error. So I'll be skipping around a bit just because there are some points that I really don't find a need to talk about. Alright, let's get into it.
Number 2. Modify behavior with rewards and punishments. They actually do this pretty heavily, but the repercussions of breaking the rules aren't as extreme as some other religions. I'll be comparing to Jehovah's Witnesses a lot since that's where I came from originally. With them, for example, the repercussions for breaking rules is socially ostracizing, possible loss of responsibility within the church, which is viewed and referred to as privileges, and in the worst cases, complete disconnection from childhood friends and family, permanently. But I'm not judging it based off of the level of extremeness of the punishment. I'm basing it off of whether or not they're actually modifying behavior. And Catholicism definitely does modify behavior. If you break the rules, you have to do penance or repentance, where you take a special necklace called a rosary, and you touch a bead and repeat a mantra for each bead on the necklace. It can take anywhere from 5 minutes to hours to say the assigned number of mantras. I would definitely call that behavior modification through a system of rewards and punishments. I'll actually go with a max score of 21 for this one. Though it isn't extreme punishment most of the time, it's still Pavlovian-style operant conditioning in the truest sense.
So I assume what you're referring to when you make that remark about 5 minutes to hours to recite mantras is the rosary, and it will not take anybody hours to recite even an entire rosary. And you especially will not be given that kind of penance after confession, at least not in the regions that I'm aware of. Have I ever heard of that occurring? I find that Telltale is making penance sound like it's this massive, hours-long affair. Hell, even 10 minutes makes it seem like it's extremely long. But honestly, all that we get for penance, at least in North America, it may be different in some areas, but I can tell you that you'll usually get 3 Hail Marys, 3 Our Fathers, 3 Magnificats of Mary, and that sort of thing only takes about 5 minutes at the most to say that. And even if you are assigned a rosary, that'll take you anywhere between maybe 15 minutes if you say, really fast, and about half an hour if you, say your words very deliberately, very slowly, things like that. And you may be thinking that this isn't very important, but I think it is important to mention that, because making it sound like we have to pray for hours on end is ridiculous, because we don't have to do that. He also mentions how this is a classic example of operant conditioning, which I actually had to look a little bit back in one of my psychology textbooks in order to recall operant conditioning, but I'd heard of it before. It's basically actions that have pleasant consequences will be repeated, while actions that have unpleasant consequences will not be repeated. So I think the idea he's trying to go for is that sin will have unpleasant consequences, that being that we have to pray. And I don't quite follow that logic because praying for less than 5 minutes, I don't think even really qualifies as a form of conditioning necessarily. Now, I understand that that could be an opinion. And I acknowledge that what I'm saying right here is just an opinion. But I don't think that that would even qualify as a form of conditioning necessarily, especially given the fact that a lot of people see prayer as pleasant, as beneficial. So if anything, you might be rewarding sin if that's what you're trying to get at there. So I don't think that it's operant conditioning.
Number 4. Restrict or control sexuality. This one is actually pretty intense. The most extreme example I can think of for controlling sexuality would be Heaven's Gate, where they would sit at the breakfast table in the morning and they go down the line telling sexual thoughts and feelings they had to try to shame themselves and others out of having them. Catholicism isn't that intense. Where Heaven's Gate is a 21 on this point, I'd say Catholicism is a 13.
So I noticed that he didn't really bring up any particular points here as to why the Catholic Church restricts sexuality and how the Catholic Church restricts sexuality, but it automatically gets an extremely high number from him. I think that's interesting.
Number 5. Control clothing and hairstyle. Women don't, say, have to wear hijabs like they do in Islam, but they're still pretty strict about modesty, and it can get really serious on a church-by-church basis. So I'm rating this one pretty high. I'd put them down as an 8.
I actually don't have any real disagreements with what he had to say here. I think he represented the church fairly well in this regard. However, what I don't really understand is why dressing a certain way would necessarily be a bad thing, or making somebody dress a certain way would necessarily be a bad thing. Because, businesses are going to tell you how to dress, the military is going to tell you how to dress, a lot of organizations are going to tell you how to dress. So, I guess what I'm wondering is, does he think that the military, businesses, things like that would be cult-like? Especially because these things are going to restrict how you dress far more than the church does.
Now let's take a look at information control. Number 1. Deliberately withhold and distort information. I spent some time thinking about this one because the average member of Catholicism doesn't deal with this. But if you notice, a lot of the time, cults will send people through training to break down their personalities and build them back up in their cult's image, like the military does. With Mormons, they do it around their 18th birthday. They'll send them on missions for 18 to 24 months, and while they're there, it's non-stop personality breakdown the entire time. If they make it through that, then they're probably in it for life. And Catholicism has their own version of this in the form of private Catholic schools and universities.
So I couldn't help but find this point to be rather humorous just because, well, Catholic schools aren't exactly known for being these personality breakdowns that are going to turn you into, a good Catholic young adult, proper and all that. That they're really not that good. They're really not that good, and they're essentially Catholic in name only. And it's actually a bit of a joke among your traditionally minded Catholics that Catholic schools are barely Catholic. And I can say that because I have been to Catholic school, and it was kind of a joke.
I have a Catholic high school in my area, and I knew some students who transferred from it when I was in high school. They said sex and drugs were worse than any other school in the area, which is interesting. Anyways, I'm gonna put this down really high for the sake of Catholic schools. I'll say 21.
I find his rating here to be absurdly high, and it seems to be there just because of the fact that Catholic schools and universities merely exist. And he even brings up the fact that drugs and sex were the highest within the area of, certain Catholic schools. So I think that kind of disregards a lot of the points that these are, Catholic indoctrination centers or whatever. He continues to mention Catholic schools later on, and it's going to affect a lot of his other ratings in the future, so I highly recommend that you watch the original video if you want to see more of that.
Number 4. Divide information into insider versus outsider doctrine. I don't think they're terrible about this one, but they do think that anybody who isn't a baptized Catholic and isn't caught up in their confessions is going to hell. That includes all the good people of other denominations who just didn't know the truth or something.
The school of thought that Telltale brought up certainly does exist, but it is not the only school of thought within the Roman Catholic faith regarding who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. There's no telling precisely who goes to heaven and who goes to hell, because that would require full knowledge of God, and we simply don't have that. But a lot of people believe that there is hope for Protestants, and there are many who believe that there is even hope for atheists too to go to heaven. However, that's not my particular school of thought, but it should be acknowledged that there are more ways of thinking about salvation than just anybody who is not baptized or is not a member of the Catholic Church will burn in hell.
Number 6. Use information gained in confession sessions against you. I feel like this one's kind of complicated. They do use information gained in confession sessions against you, but it's intended to condition you in a Pavlovian way, operant conditioning, which we covered earlier. So I'm going with 13 on this one. It might deserve a 21, I don't know. But like I said, I'm going soft on them because if they're really a cult, it'll shine through anyways.
Information garnered through confession sessions will not be used against you. And I have, confessed things from very small, very minuscule venial sins to fairly large mortal sins. And my penance was essentially the same. It'd be something like 3 Hail Marys, 3 Our Fathers, 5 Hail Marys, something like that for all of them. So truly, maybe I just haven't confessed the right thing yet, but I have never seen information in confession sessions used against a person.
Number 8. Require you to report thoughts, feelings, and activities to superiors. They are really serious about this one. It's pretty much built into the religion from the ground up. If you die before you confess your sins, then you go to hell. And they really hammer that fear of hell into you, to a very unhealthy level. So I'm going with 13. It really doesn't get more extreme than this, aside from giving a full hour-by-hour breakdown, including the non-sinful stuff. But every sinful thought, feeling, or activity you commit needs to be reported to the priest immediately.
To some, it may seem somewhat pedantic to bring this up, but feelings are never sinful with regards to Catholic theology. Regarding fear of hell, you might see that pushed a lot more at certain churches, but at others it really won't be seen at all. So it varies pretty wildly from parish to parish. Also, not every sinful thought or action necessarily needs to be confessed to the priest. It's only mortal sins that you are absolutely required to confess to a priest.
Number 4. Use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought. I haven't seen many clear, solid examples of this, but it does exist. I think they have a bigger problem with mantras and thought-stopping techniques than loaded language and cliches, so I'm going with 5. Number 5. Induce hypnotic or trance states to indoctrinate. I'd give this one a pretty high number because they do have you repeat prayers at the church service, over and over, just like you do when you pray the rosary basically. So I'm gonna say 13. I'd peg Pentecostals as the worst about this one and give them a 21. I don't think Catholics are that bad, but they're up there.
The rosary is not a thought-stopping technique so much as it is really a thought-provoking technique. It's a way to think about certain events that have occurred in Catholic theology as well as in the Bible. So it's a form of meditation, and I fail to see how meditation is a bad thing. Telltale is going to continue to bring up how the rosary, chants, singing, things like that are thought-stopping techniques, and that's going to influence a lot more of his ratings throughout the video.
Number 2. Label some emotions as evil, worldly, sinful, or wrong. They definitely view some emotions as sinful or wrong, like lust for example. I'm giving them a score of 8 for this one.
Lust is not an emotion. It's a deliberate thought or act which you engage in. So that's about all the time I've got for today. Later on, he goes on to kind of insinuate that we idolize the Pope, which is maybe true of some circles, but extremely untrue of others. But overall, I just want to end off by saying I really respect the content that Telltale makes, what he does. I simply think that he misrepresented a lot of things regarding the Catholic Church, primarily because that's just not something that he was a part of or something that he's really known. All right, God bless.